Now say it with me, it's Haval like gravel. You might not be able to pronounce the brand name yet, but rest assured you'll be seeing plenty of it soon on Australian roads. It's a subsidiary of Chinese giant Great Wall Motors, and it makes SUVs that are well priced and pretty good looking. This one is the Jolion small SUV, and it now comes in a hybrid. It's going to face some pretty stiff competition when it lands in showrooms in September 2022. But before we check it out and get all the juicy details, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel to get more new car content. The Jolion Hybrid is available in a single specification grade and it's priced from $40,990 drive away. That's $7,000 more than the top spec petrol Jolion, the Ultra, upon which it's based. Now, we know hybrid models come at a price premium, but that's a fair leap considering it's more or less the same specification as the Ultra, bar a few styling tweaks and of course that hybrid powertrain. I will say though that hybrid powertrain is more powerful than the regular petrol powertrain, courtesy of a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine paired to an electric motor and battery. Additionally, this Haval Jolion hybrid is actually a fair bit cheaper than most of its competition. Based on drive-away pricing for Victoria, the Jolion hybrid is marginally cheaper than the most affordable Subaru XV hybrid and Toyota CHR hybrid, and a lot cheaper than the cheapest Kia Niro hybrid and Honda HR-V hybrid. However, it's likely to face competition from Toyota's similarly sized Corolla Cross, which will offer a hybrid for around $35,000 when it arrives in showrooms a month after the Jolion hybrid. Whichever way you slice it, it's pretty affordable for a hybrid in this segment, especially for one that has all the equipment of a top spec car. The front seat of the Haval Jolion hybrid is a really nice minimalist clean dashboard, which I really like. Doesn't feel overwhelming. The flip side of that is that most of the key functions are controlled out of this really expansive and quite nice touchscreen. So there's no shortcuts while you're on the move, which can prove a little bit fussy and fiddly while you're driving, but otherwise you've got some key functions here for the climate control and a shortcut for the parking camera. You've got a nice digital driver's display in front of you as well, and you've got steering wheel controls on the steering wheel for audio, phone calls, cruise control, that kind of thing. You've also got a wireless charger for your smartphone here, although Apple CarPlay and Android Auto is accessible via a cable only. So kind of, defeats the purpose of a wireless charger if you ask me. This floating center console offers some extra storage down here. You've also got these funny little kind of slots either side of the gear shifter, which, I don't know, storage for credit cards, I imagine. Under here is a fairly small cup holder, but it's there and it slots away nicely. A kind of deep but small central glove box, another glove box over here. Narrow but good door bins. They're more than enough for what you need for your drink bottles and the like. And otherwise, you've got kind of some nice accoutrements in here as well. These seats are leather and they're heated. This one has electric adjustment. This one is manual adjustment. And you've got this really nice sunroof, which is nice, light, bright, makes the space feel really airy. The head clearance is really excellent in the front seat. I do feel lower to the ground, but elbow room is good. This center console is nice and wide, but not too wide. It doesn't encroach in your knee room. Everything's really well balanced and laid out. I will say though that while everything looks really good, there's sort of imitation carbon fiber here on the center console, imitation wood grain, and obviously leather seats and leather steering wheel. Some of the touch points leave a little bit to be desired. It does feel a little bit plasticky at points, so on the doors here as well, and this kind of fake leather on the dash could be a little bit better. And some of the things have sort of come off in my hand. So this rubber lining around the rear vision mirror, you probably don't need it to be fair, but that kind of fell off while I was driving, which was a little bit distracting. And these little buttons, which I thought were sort of, I don't know, headlight controls, that's fallen off again, great. Headlight controls are things that actually just, for appearance only, they don't do anything. But it looks great and it's laid out really well and there's plenty of room, and that's what matters. I've got to say, for a small SUV, this is a really great back seat. There's no raised flooring in the back here, so there's plenty of leg and knee room, even if you're in the middle seat, which tends to be the worst place to be. But in this car, it's actually okay. And the sunroof lets in plenty of light. Plus, these little smaller side windows here too make it just feel like a more open space. The headroom, is decreased slightly by the fact that it's a sloping roof, but it's got these little kind of dents in here, which means that even for taller passengers, like say our photographer who's about 6'4", his head still had room to move. So Whilst he didn't have as much clearance as I did, and I'm about 178 centimeters tall, it's still a pretty comfortable place to be, even for fully sized adults. I will say that as well, you've got a really nice sort of wide center seat. So whilst I wouldn't want to be spending long trips in the back seat if I was a grown up between two child seats, I think it is doable. There are top tether points for child seats on all three of these seats, but only ISOFIX points on both of the outboard seats. I had no issues getting my child seat in here in a rear facing position, although I did have to move the front passenger seat forward ever so slightly to just get a bit more clearance, but it was a pretty accommodating back seat for kids' seats. You've also got two air vents here, two USB ports, a little bit of storage just here behind the glove box, and some mat pockets on the back of the seats. Plus, these headrests can be raised and lowered, so if you're just driving alone and you want a little bit more visibility, they can be stowed away, but if you've got passengers, you can raise them up. There are lots of logos back here. There's Haval seat stitching here, and then a logo down by the speaker, so they're doing plenty of work for name recognition. But I will say one thing that I didn't quite love is that the doors feel quite light. That means they're really nice and easy to open and shut, which is really appreciated. But on a few instances, I found that I didn't close them properly. So I'd walk away from the car, and particularly with the boot door, I felt like I slammed it shut, but it just hadn't closed quite right. So I couldn't lock the car. I had to come back and kind of go around and see what was open. So it does mean that those slightly lighter doors, the trade-off is they're harder to close. Now let's talk about safety. The Haval Jolion range hasn't yet been tested by ANCAP, so it's currently unrated, but I will say that this car gets a really impressive level of active safety tech as standard. So the autonomous emergency braking system can detect pedestrians, cyclists, it can function at intersections and in reverse, which is something a lot of top spec cars miss out on. So that's impressive. It's also got live traffic sign monitoring, adaptive cruise control. There's a rear cross traffic alert that can auto brake, there's traffic sign monitoring, driver condition monitoring, tire pressure monitoring, all the kinds of monitoring that you could possibly want. Plus there are 7 airbags in here, including a center airbag in the front, which just adds an extra layer of protection to front seat occupants. Back here there's a 390 litre boot, which is actually 40 litres less than the petrol Jolion, and that's because they've got a squeezer hybrid battery back here. The rear seats fold 60-40 split, so if you've got a child seat in place, that takes out a fair amount of that space, but more or less it's okay for your standard Bunnings fare. You wouldn't want to be putting any large furniture in here or anything too long, because it's not a super long car and there's not heaps of room back here, but it'll do the trick. Now, getting going from a standstill, this car is remarkably quiet, and I will say that it functions a lot more like an electric car than some of the hybrids from Toyota, in that it's quiet most of the time. So I actually don't sense that handover from electric to petrol power as much as I do in some other hybrid cars, and that's really to be applauded. So it actually has to tell you that it's on, because it's so quiet when you turn it on that you might not be aware that it's ready to go. And then once you kind of get up to speed and that petrol engine kicks in, it's still quite a subtle, muted engine note. So that's really handy, and it is a very quiet car. The trade-off of that is without that engine noise, you do feel like there's a little bit more tyre noise coming up through the cabin. So I had a sense of the road and tyre noise more than I do in other cars, and that could just simply be because the engine's really quiet. This car drives a lot more like a hatchback than an SUV. And what I mean by that is a few things. First of all, the steering feel for me is a little bit too light. So it's just hard to gauge the level of input you require. And I do find that turning corners, I'm sort of oversteering or overcorrecting, and it's just a little bit sensitive, and it can feel like it becomes unraveled going over bumps, and it sort of feels a little bit wobbly. The flip side of that is it's really easy to manage in small streets and when you're parking and maneuvering, so you don't need to kind of put heaps of gusto into the steering wheel, and you don't have to kind of put heaps of effort in. It's just a nice, simple, straightforward maneuvering process. Additionally, I feel like the ride comfort's actually pretty good. I do feel lower to the ground. The ride height is lower than an SUV, so I do have a sense of the road beneath me. As I mentioned before, there's a little bit more tire noise, and I don't feel as though I'm completely cushioned, although I haven't found any hard knocks going over things like speed bumps or potholes and everything like that. It's definitely not uncomfortable. It does a really nice job of muting out those harder edges. It's just not like you're driving an SUV where you feel really cushioned and protected from the road. I don't love the visibility in this car. I do feel like the ride height is lower than some other SUVs, so I don't feel like my field of vision is huge. And additionally, the C-pillar is quite thick and the rear windshield is sloped and quite narrow. So I do feel like I have quite a big blind spot at the back, left and right rear. However, that's compensated for by blind spot monitoring and things like that. But I do personally like to do head checks, and I do wish this had just a little bit more visibility. Now, whilst I love how sort of minimalist this dashboard is, it's really great, it is a little bit tricky to access some key functions while on the move. For example, there's no shortcut for seat heating. That's all done through the touchscreen, and all of these shortcut buttons here, bar one for the overhead camera, are all related to climate control. So if you want to access things sort of on short notice that are a little bit more intricate, so say, you know, the one pedal driving system or heated seats, it does require you to go through the touchscreen, which I personally find a little bit fiddly when I'm driving. I don't like it, and I find that I get a bit distracted. There are steering wheel controls, however, for the cruise control on the right-hand side and for phone calls and audio here. So you're more or less covered for most of your key functions. You might just find that for some of the things you're used to accessing easily in other cars, you have to go through the touchscreen, and it might just require you pulling over to the side of the road. Now, the Jolion kind of chooses which form of power it uses based on the driving setting and situation. So it can operate in sort of pure EV mode up to around 35 kilometers an hour. It can also operate in series mode, in which the petrol engine powers the battery and electric motor, and that's also up to around 35 kilometers an hour. And then you've got regenerative braking mode, which is activated automatically when you're decelerating to recoup some energy from that braking sensation. And then finally, you've got parallel mode, which uses the two power forms in tandem as required, so petrol and electric, and the handover's pretty seamless. Additionally, you can operate this car in single pedal or one pedal driving mode, and that just means basically you don't really need to use the brake. So if you want to switch it on through the touchscreen here, you just operate single pedal, you hit open, weirdly, not activate or anything, but open the single pedal mode. And once that's activated, it just means that when you take your foot off the accelerator, the car slows very dramatically and quickly and recoups some of the energy from that braking. So it's sort of like driving a pure electric car, and it's pretty immediate. When you take your foot off the accelerator, it slows down pretty quickly. So if you're an electric car lover, if you kind of like that feeling of only having to use the one pedal, it works really well. And I'm yet to see the impact that's had on fuel consumption, but I'd imagine that it can lower your fuel consumption quite dramatically. So I've currently got the car set to one pedal driving mode, and it is quite a sensation that takes some getting used to, I will say. So, you know, when you take your foot off the accelerator, it really slows quite dramatically. So that can feel a little bit fussy when you're maneuvering. It can feel like you might want to switch it off just to get precision in reverse parking and things like that. It's also worth noting that in freeway driving, it's kind of strange, because normally you take your foot off the accelerator briefly whilst freeway driving and it kind of coasts for you, but this slows the car right down. So that's just worth keeping in mind. I recommend that if you're not familiar with one pedal driving, get used to it in sort of some side streets before you really get out on the freeway and give it a go, because it is an adjustment. Now, the Jolion's adaptive cruise system is actually pretty advanced for a car at this price point. It's all speed, so it can slow to a stop, and it keeps the distance from the car in front as well. It also has steering intervention, so if you're sort of drifting out of your lane, it nudges you back in, and it keeps you centered in your lane as well. It also can sense if there's any sort of curve on the road ahead, so if you're going up to a corner, it'll slow the car down accordingly rather than speeding up and flinging you around a corner. So it's pretty advanced. It does still require full driver supervision, as do all of these systems, but it's not sort of a tune out and kind of let the car do all the work for you. I personally found that I still like to have my sort of hands on the steering wheel, and it was a little bit late to respond, and it wasn't sort of perfect in sensing the distance from the car ahead, or it was a bit slow to respond if a car pulled in front. But for a system in a car of this price point, I think it's really impressive. Now, outputs in the Jolion hybrid are rated at 139 kilowatts of power and 375 newton meters of torque. And what that basically just means in real world terms is it's got more than enough power for around town driving. I did find that it sort of topped out at around 80 Ks or more. It just felt a little bit underpowered compared to sort of say your larger SUVs with larger engines. But for the most part, it's pretty quick to get going from a standstill. Power delivery is really even-handed and nice. And the engine noise is pretty quiet up until around the 80 km/h point where you really put your foot down, and then you do start to notice a little bit of a droning noise, and it's certainly got a little bit more power than some of its competitors as well, which is nice. Also, importantly, it's gutsier than the regular Jolion, so that's something to consider if you're weighing up between the petrol Jolion or the hybrid Jolion. But it's really immediate to get going from a standstill. The handover between power modes is really smooth, you'll barely notice it. And it's got what's called a 2-speed automatic transmission. I don't quite know the ins and outs of that. It's a Haval system that they've developed for their hybrids, but basically it drives much like a continuously variable automatic transmission, except without that kind of droning noise. So you don't really notice any stepped gear changes or anything like that. It's just an even-handed and consistent delivery of power. This car has plenty of bells and whistles, so you've got automatic wipers, automatic headlights and things like that. So everything is kind of thought of for you, and you can kind of not worry about things like that on longer drives or in wet weather. One of the things I love about this car is it has an awesome reverse camera, but also an overhead view monitor. So it's got a front camera as well, and multi-angle view, and a bird's eye view when you're maneuvering as well. So it just means that when you're parking in small, tight spaces, you can check basically every angle of the car. Not only has it got every angle, it's a really high quality camera. And on this 12.3-inch touchscreen, it's projected, it's really crisp, it's really big, and it's got a great view of everything that's around you. So I've been in cars from premium manufacturers that don't have cameras as good as this car. I've also got a handy head-up display which is projected onto the screen in front of me right in my field of vision. That's got a big digital speedometer as well as live speed limit updates based on road signs. So always handy to know A, what the speed limit is, and B, what speed you're traveling. I will say that I am missing an all-wheel drive system, particularly given it's absolutely pouring here in Melbourne. I'm sort of finding that a little bit on roads with sort of tram tracks and wet roads, there's a bit of tyre slippage. I don't feel that secure, so I'm kind of counteracting that by adjusting my driving style accordingly, taking off nice and slow from a standstill, really slowing down to take corners. I don't feel as confident as I would in an all-wheel drive car, so that's something worth noting given this hybrid only comes in a front-wheel drive. These seats are perfectly comfortable. They're supportive. I've got electric adjustment on the driver's seat, not on the passenger seat, so keep that in mind. But I feel like I'm able to get my right driving position. I do feel like this steering wheel, while you can adjust it for height, I wish I could pull it out a little bit further, closer to me, because it does feel like it's quite far forward and up against the dash, and I kind of like to have a steering wheel that's a little bit closer to me. My friends make fun of me because I feel like I drive like I'm right at the wheel. I don't know why, but I just like to be really far forward. So if you like that, I would love a little bit more steering wheel adjustment. It's manual adjustment, not electric adjustment, unfortunately, but you know, you can't have it all. Finally, I do find this dial gear shifter is really fiddly to use. I find that all the time though. I'm a really traditional kind of thinker when it comes to gear sticks. I just like it to be old-fashioned, but it does take some getting used to, and it's a little bit fiddly, and I've found sometimes when I've tried to put it back into drive from reverse, it's gone into neutral and vice versa. So it just requires a little bit more thought, and once you've been driving for a week or so, I imagine you get used to it. So the Jolion Hybrid has what's called all scenario automatic parking. So theoretically, it should be able to reverse park, perpendicular park, you name it. It should do all the work for you. So I'm going to test it. I'm going to live test it here. I'm in the touchscreen. There's a setting called Parking Assist. I've got it set to online calibration. So I hit this button and it's got cautions. It says, number 1, if the current look is good, don't do this. I don't know what that means. It feels quite profound. It says the marking is clear and the road is flat. Yep, I'm in a side street. So I'm going to hit this button that says enter calibration. It's very formal. AVM image collecting, watch out surrounding, keep speed and direction. I'm just going to drive forward so it can sense the space. Well, theoretically, that's what it should be able to do. Driving forward, I'm driving forward. I'm now level with the car in front of the space. I'm hoping that it's gone and picked up. Now, it's not telling me to do anything. Hello? Nothing's happening. I'm going to hit cancel and go back into the menu. Bear with me here. We're all learning together. I've chosen a section of road where there are literally no cars. So if it can't park here, it cannot park anywhere. It says AVM image collection. Watch out surrounding, keep speed and direction. Okay, so I'm just going to go so slowly. Just edging forward. I'm doing something wrong here. Surely. It's not doing anything. I'll put it in reverse maybe? Well, it's all scenario automatic parking except that it's also no scenario automatic parking because there doesn't seem to be any scenario in which this can park for me. I'd imagine that if you're on a busy main road and you want to use this, maybe just don't. That's probably my hot tip on that. I could be doing something wrong. If I am, I will add it as a note in this video later. I'll call Haval and find out, but for the time being, this is not working for me.
Spoiler alert, the reason the self-park didn't work is because the vehicle isn't actually equipped with that capability. It just has the menu option, dedicated screen and activation button. As for the all-important fuel economy, my real-world consumption was 7.8 litres per 100 kilometres. That's about a 20% improvement on the regular Jolion, but compared to hybrids from the likes of Toyota, which can often manage 5 litres per 100 kilometres or even less, it's pretty thirsty, and I even drove predominantly in one-pedal mode to improve economy. While Haval is yet to confirm pricing for Jolion hybrid servicing, buyers can expect it to mirror the regular Jolion, which costs $1,550 over 5 years or an average of $310 per annual visit.
Haval buyers receive a 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty, 5 years of roadside assistance and 5 years of capped price servicing. Haval claims fuel economy is a low 5 litres per 100 kilometres using regular 91 unleaded petrol.
Unfortunately, while the purchase price is cheap compared to most of its competitors and you get plenty of equipment, its higher fuel economy might counteract that saving.
Where it can feel lacking, unfortunately, is in the execution of everything it offers. So the cabin just feels like it lacks the polish of some of its rivals, and the driver experience and some of the driver tech leaves a little bit to be desired.
Toyota remains the industry leader in hybrid tech, and it will be well worth cross-shopping this car with the Corolla Cross Hybrid or CHR Hybrid, which tend to offer better resale value and improved fuel economy.
However, if you're after an attractive, well-appointed city runabout with hybrid power and extra space, this is a really great entry point into that segment.